what's up everybody? It's Dex, and for this weekend's lesson, we're gonna start our introduction to supply and demand. This isn't gonna be a huge video. This is just gonna be an introduction, so this will probably end up being about a 3-part series over the next couple weeks, because supply and demand is a pretty complex topic, and it's something you're probably not going to completely grasp in just the first sitting. So I took a couple notes so we can talk about before we start. So what is supply and demand? Supply and demand is not the same thing as support and resistance. Okay, so support and resistance, those are key levels on your chart, right? These are areas, the stock has a hard time getting past, etc. Supply and demand are the areas of the chart where demand, let's put this down just so we're all on the same page right from the beginning. Demand equals buyers, supply equals sellers. Okay. So when we're talking about supply and demand, we're looking for imbalances. So a balanced market is just a normal trending market. Right here, this is a relatively balanced market, except for this big imbalance. Okay, supply and demand zones are our imbalances. Okay, so when we're doing this, we're trying to trade like an institution, right? Bank of America, Citadel, all these hedge funds, they're not just slapping market orders, right? What they're doing is they're using limit orders. So they're picking their spots on the chart, setting their order, and they're waiting for it to get touched. Right, so if I'm Bank of America, and I see this big supply zone, I'm not going short after this move, right? I'm putting my limit order here and hopefully getting filled on a retest. So that's why we see these big moves. Let's look at our first example here. Okay, so how do we draw our zones? Okay, so to draw our zones, we're looking for an impulsive move. Okay, so normally the easiest way to find this is when you get a downtrend and it explodes to an uptrend. This is going to be an impulsive move right here. This market is out of balance because we're getting more buy orders than we are sell orders. Okay, so when we're drawing our zone, we're going from the wick to the body of the breakout, right? So we want to just capture this whole meat of the breakout zone. Something that was taught to me by one of my mentors was a 10% ATR rule. So zones should be roughly 10% of your ATR. So QQQ has a $6.40 ATR. So our zones should be roughly 65 cents. That's not something that's super important. You just want to make sure you're not setting zones that are too small or way too big. But it's more important to get, the majority of the move. And this is something I didn't notice before, but this is exactly what I'm talking about. So if we had looked back a couple days, and we have this massive sell-off here on the Qs, and we sell off all day, Next day we have this nice uptrend, you know, and then the following day we gap down, and where do we reverse? Right in that supply zone that is now flipped to demand, right? Even here we have our supply zone set, you know. Next day we gap down, or I guess we sell off, then we gap up the next day. We come up and we fail this zone, base, and rally, right? So this is what we'll get into another day, but this is a rally, base, and then rally. And then of course, right, the next day we gap down. Where's the reversal? Right in that new demand spot, because this supply is now demand. If old supply becomes new demand, and vice versa, right? So we get this beautiful retest, and then even end of day we even get this nice little push. And then who would have thought, next day we gap down, we try to push right at open, right? Reject. So this is now our supply zone. And you don't want to just keep the same zone forever, because you do got to remember the biggest thing that's different about supply and demand versus support and resistance, and obviously you're not seeing it here, but the biggest difference is the more times a supply demand zone gets tested, typically the weaker that zone is going to be, because the reason we get these moves is based off of limit orders, right? So if an institution wanted to get long here the day before in this demand zone, you know, there still needs to be unfilled limit orders in this area. It's not just magic, right? There has to be institutions willing to long in these demand zones, or it's not going to work. Okay, so now we flipped this to supply. You know, even if I didn't have this here, because I didn't even notice this at first, I would have had this drawn in. I would have drew it like this is how I had it at first. But because we noticed that, and this is such a strong zone, we're gonna keep it just how it was. Okay, so this is like as beautiful as it gets. Okay, I would have been all over this. So we open up, we press supply, reject, retest. The retest is always going to be the entry, right? That's always going to be the best entry. We're going to get into retests in the next video, and entries and exits. Like I said, this is just the introduction, but this is going to be the most perfect entry right here. Either of these candles. If you wanted to wait for this, you know, I'm not going to hate you. And we are on a 15-minute time frame here. This is kind of a big debate on supply and demand. What time frame you draw your zones on, where you draw your zones, yada yada. What I do is I draw my supply demand zones typically on the 3, 5, and 15-minute chart. Typically the 15 is where I'm looking to get my zones, and then hour, daily, weekly, I'm using support resistance levels. So like the trade I took on NASDAQ this morning, you know, these nice thick lines, these are going to be hourly or daily levels, and then these are going to be 15-minute levels, right? So this is the trade I took this morning. Where was it? I think it was this candle here. Price tested my supply zone. It tested this upper trend line, you know, and I went short in here, and it ended up being a great trade. Nothing crazy, but see, I went short around here and covered for about 30 points. So yeah, so how are we doing on time? Damn. Okay, so this is going to be the best entry here, right? You don't want to just slap slap the ask, as soon as we enter a zone. You're definitely going to want to wait for a retest and confirmation. So this would have been a beautiful entry. We reject here, and then we start to reverse. And this would be a spot I would be looking at demand. Okay. Because we push down aggressively. I love the hammer candles, right? This is, if a hammer candle at the bottom of a demand zone, chef kiss, right? I mean, that's as good as it gets. We get the nice hammer candle and we get the impulsive move up, right? Change in direction. What happens? We test our supply zone with huge volume. Not gonna lie, I possibly would have looked too long off of this hammer candle here on the break of supply. Anytime you break supply, you don't want to just long on the break. You want to let it break, retest supply, and then confirm it's gonna keep going. And that is gonna be some of the best entries right there. Is that retest. Okay, and then perfect. So we retest, we reject that supply, wick right down into our demand, and then huge impulsive move up. Consolidate in supply, reject, and then just kind of consolidate. What happens the next day? As good as it gets, folks. And remember, this is a 15-minute chart, so you're not seeing this whole price action in here. We gap down, we try to rally, we test our demand zone, which is now supply, since we are under the zone. If price is under the zone, it's always going to be supply. If price is above the zone, it's always going to be demand. Okay, so now we have the supply zone here. We attempt to rally. Sellers are still here. People are still interested at this price. They want to push it down, right? And we get this magnificent trade. If we went from the low to the high, 326, that's a $4 move just by easily, attacking our prior zone. I mean, look at this candle. This would have been the easiest entry on big volume too, and then the volume just kept rolling in. So supply demand versus support resistance. Support resistance is just the area of the chart where price struggles, and supply and demand is marking the imbalances between buyers and sellers. Okay, we're always looking for impulsive moves to make our zones. We're not looking for consolidation. We're looking for price to come down and then spike back up for our demand zone. We really want a big move that people missed and that people are gonna want to re-enter the market, at that point. And then another important part, the more tests, the weaker the zone. So if you got a supply zone that's on its 5th retest, that doesn't mean it's a strong level, right? It's not like support and resistance. The more times that's test, the weaker it's gonna get. Doesn't mean it's not gonna work. I mean, look how many tests QQQ had, right? Over multiple days, of course. So that is gonna enforce the zone. Obviously, multiple tests over different days is gonna be different. But as we see here, on this, we got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So when we're getting these retests down here, we're not getting these big impulsive moves. I mean, kind of. But you get the point. The more tests, the weaker the zone. If it's testing from multiple days, that's a little different. That's a zone that's clearly pretty strong still. But when you see that, ideally you want to get that second test, you know, like here. This is perfect. We got the demand zone test, and then as soon as we have good confirmation, we have this massive volume candle, hammer candle in the zone. That would have been confirmation for me, and I would have been slapping this long. You know, this is a perfect example of demand. Okay. And it's also great to pair with the visible range volume profile, because, you know, when you have this huge volume shelf here in a supply zone, I mean, that's just adding confirmation to my trade, right? And then, yeah, we talked about this. Institutions. So institutions move the markets. Supply and demand zones are just unfilled limit orders. And if you want to learn more about supply and demand, some YouTube channels to check out are Day Trading Addict, Carmine Rosada, probably the best supply and demand traders out there. And then the last one was one of my mentors, and his name is Montana Trades on Twitter. And he also has a YouTube under the same name. Okay. And then just to reiterate, demand equals buyers, supply equals sellers. Okay. Alright, so we're already 15 minutes in. I'm gonna call it now. Like I said, this is gonna be a 3-part series. So next week we're gonna talk about entries and exits on a supply and demand zone, stop losses, and then the last week we're gonna talk about some more advanced supply and demand strategies.